He stood under a soft, fading light, a man crowned by fame yet chased by a question he could no longer outrun. He had the hits, the movies, the swagger, but there was a deeper story he had never told. He finally exhaled and let it come. The truth about the man who made him, pushed him, doubted him, and somehow saved him. And the first name he spoke was Buck. He grew up far from neon marquees and gilded stages. A kid named Dwight David Yoakam, born in Pikeville, Kentucky, and raised amid the working grit of Columbus, Ohio. The radio was his window and his tutor. Hank's ache taught him mercy. Haggard steel taught him spine. But it was the Bakersfield snap, the Telecaster sting, the drive, the stubborn insistence on honesty that seared itself into his bones. He didn't just admire Buck Owens, he studied him like scripture. He learned early that the stage can be both a home and a fight. He was the quiet kid who wrote loud songs, the boy who wore his hat low because his dreams were high. He didn't look like trouble, but he sang like he'd seen it. And when the first applause found him, he noticed something important. It was never just the melody people loved. It was the truth inside it. He took that truth to Nashville and knocked on the door like everyone else. The town was smiling, glossy, airbrushed to perfection. His sound wasn't. His guitar twanged too raw. His voice cut too close to the bone. He was told to smooth the edges, round the corners, make it sparkle for radio. He looked down at his boots and decided instead to leave. He drove west with more stubbornness than money, and Los Angeles, of all places, opened its arms. He stepped into clubs where punk kids and rock outsiders stood shoulder to shoulder, and they heard him like he'd been theirs all along. The beat was different, but the heart was the same. Don't fake it. The bars smelled like beer and electricity. He sang Honky Tonk Man until the floor pulsed. A circle formed, Los Lobos to the left, X to the right, and the Kentucky kid in a low-slung hat didn't flinch. He cut a record with a title as cocky as a wink. Guitars, Cadillacs, etc. The needle dropped and everything shifted. The Telecaster bit like a whip. The drums thumped like a tire on hot asphalt. His voice, nasal, wounded, defiant, threaded Hank's prayer through a California night. The critics nodded. The crowd swelled. The kid Nashville didn't want became the man LA insisted on. He wore tight jeans on purpose and a grin for protection. He moved like trouble you'd forgive twice. But behind the stance stood a craftsman who turned syllables until they shone. He chased melodies up and down motel walls. He tucked heartbreak into back pockets and pulled it out on stage. When the lights went low, the songs kept arriving. Guitars, Cadillacs. It won't hurt. The rooms got bigger, and the silence before the first chord grew holy. He followed with Hillbilly Deluxe, and then a line of records that sounded like a long drive with the windows down and a head full of unsent letters. Buenos noches, from a lonely room, flickered like a neon prayer. This time stepped into the dark and found a pulse. Ain't that lonely yet, fast as you? 1,000 miles from nowhere. They weren't just hits, they were exit ramps for the broken-hearted. But even triumph casts a shadow, and in that shadow stood the man whose reflection lived in the chrome of every Bakersfield lick. Dwight had built a road out of admiration and defiance, and at the end of it waited Buck Owens, grinning, guarded and already a myth. He first saw Buck the way everyone saw him. At first, larger than the room, eyes like bright strikes, a right hand that made the guitar bark and sing. Dwight's heart thudded like a snare. He was no imitator. He'd spent too many nights sacrificing sleep to get the feel right. Still, he wondered if the hero would see a pilgrim or a pickpocket. The air between them stiffened with unasked questions. Years earlier, Buck and Don Rich had lit the country sky like twin stars. Then Don's motorcycle went down, and the light went out. The town moved on. The charts cooled. The phone stopped ringing. Buck did what survivors do. He smiled at the crowd and swallowed the silence. Legacy is heavy when it turns into a museum. Dwight arrived carrying both flowers and fire. He wasn't there to resurrect an era. He wanted to prove it never died. He lifted the Bakersfield sound out of nostalgia and aimed it at the present tense. Buck looked at him sideways, studying the hat, the stance, the Telecaster, and tried to decide if this young man was a tribute or a trespass. Respect was a gate. Dwight understood he would have to earn the key. They circled each other across a handful of shows and conversations, finding the edges and trying to decide how much to show. Dwight didn't flinch from the truth. Buck was charming, funny, quick as a whip, and hard as a boot heel if you got too close. Trust was not a word he handed out. Dwight kept showing up anyway. Then the idea came like a dare that felt like destiny. Streets of Bakersfield had been out there a long time, underheard, underloved. Dwight wanted to bring it back. Not as a relic, but as a revival. He made the call. The room held its breath. Buck listened, silent, for a beat that lasted a lifetime. And then he said yes. When their voices braided, time collapsed. Buck's grit was the oak. Dwight's edge was the wind. The guitars snapped like power lines in August. The lyric took a step wider and swallowed the present whole. The record hit #1 and did more than climb a chart. It put a crown back where it belonged. Buck's name rose again in the lights. Dwight stood next to him, not as a son in the shadow, but as a partner on the line. Success can heal old wounds, but it can also reopen them. Pride and gratitude share the same hallway and occasionally bump shoulders. There were nights when you could feel the temperature shift. Buck's joking turned to distance. Dwight's patience turned to steel. One evening, Buck would clap Dwight on the back and call him brother. The next, he'd vanish behind a grin that said, "We'll see." It wasn't malice. It was armor. Dwight learned to hear what wasn't said. After Don Rich, the world had taught Buck the price of closeness. He glanced toward the wings, where a ghost still tuned up. Dwight recognized that look. Loss makes a man loud on stage and quiet at home. If Buck seemed half present at times, it was because the other half was still holding a place in the past. They found a rhythm anyway. Dwight played the Crystal Palace with Buck, watching from the corner, the room wired to history. Some nights the older man would hop up unannounced and let the old fire out. Other nights he'd sit back, eyes bright, as if surprised his heart could still warm. Dwight kept chasing the exact intersection where respect meets rebellion and lands as truth. Meanwhile, the world kept tugging at Dwight's jacket. The films arrived, and he took the screen like he took a stage, by underplaying and letting the danger hum. In Sling Blade, he wore a character like a bruise and made audiences flinch. Panic Room, Logan Lucky, Crank, the Newton Boys. Each role was another way of saying he knew how to listen for the quiet part of a story and make it loud. The tabloids came for dessert, as they always do. Red carpet flashes with Sharon Stone made copy editors cackle with delight, and the public squinted at the pairing like it was a math problem. 5 weeks can hold a lifetime in Hollywood, and then it doesn't. He dated Karen Duffy a while longer, a stretch that looked normal by celebrity standards because it had conversations in it. When it ended, there were no fireworks, just two separate paths walked with mutual kindness. On stage, he kept throwing gasoline on the right kind of fire. The sets whirled between fresh woes and old scars. 1,000 miles from nowhere sounded bigger when whispered. "Ain't that lonely yet," could still knock the wind out of a packed arena. His voice didn't sweeten with age, it sharpened. He learned that truth without desperation travels further. And always, circling in the background, was Buck. Their friendship never fit into a single word because it contained too many: mentor, rival, mirror, shield. There were months of closeness and pockets of frost, nights when the laughter rang true and mornings when the phone stayed silent. Dwight wouldn't pretend otherwise. He didn't need a good story, he needed the real one. The real one got harder in 2006, when the call came and the light dimmed again. Buck was gone. The news dropped like a curtain. Dwight carried the weight as if someone had removed a beam from a barn and asked him to hold the roof with 2 hands. He sang the old songs and made them new, not because anyone asked him to, but because he owed the truth that much. Grief rearranges a room. You walk into your own life and can't find the chair. Dwight honored Buck the way country music has always honored its dead, by refusing to let the cadence die. He kept the Bakersfield snap in the conversation. He told stories about laughter and stubbornness, about a man who could turn affection into a wisecrack and a wisecrack into a shield. He didn't canonize him or confess him. He remembered him. Years smoothed some edges and revealed others. Dwight married Emily Joyce in a small room, brightened by sincerity in the strangest spring of a strange century. It was 2020. And the world was counting 7 steps between souls while he and Emily counted the 10 hearts in the room and called it enough. It wasn't a spectacle, it was a promise. When their son arrived later that year, a different kind of melody started. Little feet in a house where guitars lean against walls and wait their turn. Fatherhood retuned him. The shows still roared, but the whispers at home grew louder and sweeter. Time brought perspective, and finally, testimony. At 69, Dwight didn't owe anyone an explanation about the man he'd loved and wrestled all his life, but he offered one anyway. "Buck changed my life," he said, and the room heard the period at the end of the sentence. Then he added the part most people never get to. "It was tough, and I had to earn it. Respect is sweeter when it was expensive." He talked about how Buck could shift from warmth to weather in an instant, how he tested loyalty by stepping away and seeing who followed. He admitted there were days he didn't know where he stood. He said that after Don Rich, Buck's smiles came with caution tape, and Dwight learned to respect the barrier instead of breaking it. He confessed what he'd come to believe, that the man behind the shine carried a private winter he rarely named. He described the alchemy of streets of Bakersfield, how the take felt less like a recording and more like a ceremony. He said he saw something loosen in Buck that day, a burden set down and a legacy reclaimed. "It reminded him who he was," Dwight said, "and maybe it reminded me who I was too. A hit can crown you, a true duet can connect you." He remembered Crystal Palace nights when Buck sat in the wings and let the music run, the room like a river. He remembered the grin that pretended not to be sentimental, and the way the old outlaw looked when a younger man honored him without asking permission. He remembered the hush after the final chord, the sound every performer knows and almost never describes: relief. He didn't disguise the static either. He said that pride and pain often arrive dressed alike, and it takes years to tell them apart. He said they butted heads because their heads were built that way, hard for protection and stubborn from survival. He said he learned when to press and when to pause. He didn't apologize for either. And then he said, "The thing that settles over a room like dusk, honesty is the only inheritance that doesn't spoil." Buck taught him that, not with lectures, but with a Telecaster that didn't lie in a tone that wouldn't beg. The Bakersfield Code wasn't about geography, it was a constitution. Say it plain, play it true, and let the truth take the punches. Dwight kept his end of the bargain. On stages big and small, he carried that snap like a banner. He let his voice fracture when the lyric required, never sanding down the splinters. He didn't chase the charts so much as haunt them, reminding radio that surprise is the spice and tradition is the meal. He grew into his legend without shriveling in it. There were nights, years after Buck passed, when Dwight felt the old man in the room, the way a pilot senses crosswinds. He'd hit a run of shows, and the band would lock in, and there Buck was, less a ghost than a grin. Music is a haunted house built by joy. He learned to be grateful for the footsteps in the hall. He told the truth about himself, too. He admitted the grind had once tempted him to become a caricature of the man in the hat, to make the signature into a mask. The cure was always the same: write a song that hurts a little to sing, and mean it when you do. Gimmicks starve the soul. Work feeds it. He said that fatherhood reordered his ambitions like furniture moved back into place. The crowd remained a blessing, but the small hand in his palm returned him to daylight. He found it harder to pretend to be a myth in a house where someone needed breakfast. The Telecaster still twanged. The lullabies softened the edges. He looked back at Nashville, at the town that had once turned him away for being too sharp around the corners, and he smiled. He'd come in through the side door with a California key, and the house didn't collapse. It grew another room. Bakersfield didn't replace anything. It revived something. The past isn't a prison when the present knows how to listen. As he finished his confession about Buck, he spoke about the cost of being made by someone who was also wounded. Love complicated by distance, guidance tangled with pride. He said he understood now in a way he couldn't then. Some mentors are better at pushing than hugging, and both can save you. He chose to be grateful for the push. He closed with the line that sounded like a chord struck clean and true. You don't have to be Nashville to be country. You don't even have to be Bakersfield to be Bakersfield. You have to be real. That's the permit. That's the price. That's the point. He walked off into a life that had been boiled down to its essence. A family that warmed a house, a band that trusted the count-off, an audience that came to feel something honest. He carried the Telecaster like a testimony, and the hat like a habit. He left the myth to the magazines and kept the man for the microphone. And somewhere, in the wide American night, a jukebox clicked and stuttered and chose Streets of Bakersfield again. Buck's voice came from one speaker, Dwight's from the other, and in the middle, the air turned golden for 3 minutes and 3 seconds. Two men met there, one guarding his heart, one risking his. The record didn't just top a chart, it built a bridge and dared time to tear it down. They didn't just play heroes on a sleeve of vinyl. They lived it in the rooms where old grief sat beside new joy and tried not to make a scene. Buck taught Dwight to swing the hammer of truth without apology. Dwight taught Buck that a legacy can rise again if someone younger is brave enough to carry it without stealing it. The exchange was uneven in places and perfect where it counted. What part of their stories surprised you the most? The distance that guarded affection or the song that healed it for a while? And if this road through Bakersfield moved you, wait until you see where it leads, when a Kentucky kid takes the long way home and still arrives right on time.